Okay, thank you, and thank you for listening to us for the next half an hour. There are going to be questions for part of the panel. So you can see that I'm joined with my colleagues, Carl Donaldson, final year student from psychology. I'm Kathryn Waddington, I'm a reader in psychology at the University of Westminster, and also Andy Aresti, colleague from criminology. There's a couple of points to make with regard to that. If you look in your programme, originally it was going to be Debbie Husbands and myself that were doing this keynote, and Debbie unfortunately can't be here. So it's great that we've got Carl and Andy who are doing this with me. And as we know, it takes two men to do the work of one woman.
Two good men.
So thank you to them for kind of stepping in when Debbie wasn't able to do this. And also to reflect the fact that this is a STEM Congress, but we're doing this from the perspective of giving you a couple of examples of what we're doing at Westminster in a social science perspective, because equality, diversity and inclusion go across all disciplines. Also, we are at Westminster an affiliate institution of the Darwin International Institute for the Study of Compassion. So this is a bit of a kind of call out to give some publicity to what we call DISC, which is one of many of a number of initiatives that are looking at compassion in the broadest sense, supporting the development of a new generation of scholars and future leaders as skilled practitioners and promoters of compassion. Compassion is really, really important. And I guess you need to think about, well, why are we looking at this from the point of view of compassion? What's so special about compassion? So we've got the Dalai Lama, and one of the things that I was thinking about with regard to this is to think about compassion as a framework. And I'm using this sense very much in the way that Kimberly Crenshaw talks about intersectionality as a frame, as a way of looking at things and actually using it to see and hear what and who might fall through the gaps and the intersections of overlapping social identities. And we all have many overlapping social identities. And I also want to say a thank you to Carl, because when we were discussing our presentation a little while ago, he said, but what about values? And sometimes values drop through these cracks around the intersections. And it's worth just saying a little bit more about the Dalai Lama. He said, it's not enough to be compassionate, you must act. Now, he didn't say you must have a smart action plan that's nicely formatted, that sits on a shelf, and when it comes to the comment section, somebody's put in nicely formatted, so the line goes like that, ongoing. I'm sure we've all been there to some respect. So action is really, really important. And I guess we could have a conversation about what do we mean about compassion, and the answer to that is it's very, very different. So if you say to a neuroscientist, what's compassion, they'd talk about interpersonal neurobiology, and I have to read this, and the anterior cingulate cortex. If you talk to an anthropologist, they'll talk in terms of pro-social behaviour. If you ask a philosopher, what does compassion mean to you? They might give you a bit of Plato and go back to the attributed quote to Plato, which is, be kind, everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle. If you ask a doctor or a nurse, what does compassion mean to you? They're likely to say, oh, well, that's a nice could-be-have thing, but we don't have time for that anymore. There's not enough resources and too much bureaucracy. If you ask a child, what does compassion mean to you? They might say something like, well, be nice and share your toys. So there are many different perspectives to compassion. So just to give you a little bit of a perspective with regard to where we're coming to from in this particular perspective, I'm just going to start with the pictures at the bottom. I'm a work and organisational psychologist. I teach in a university, I work in a psychology department, and I also come from a background having been a nurse and having worked clinically. And a lot of my friends and colleagues are still nurses and working in the medical profession, which is why I can say about compassion has just been squeezed out because of bureaucracy, paperwork, and lack of resources. So I'm coming at this from the point of view of Monica Warline and Jane Dutton's work, which is very much looking at compassion from the point of view of an organisational leadership and management perspective, which can be applied across any number of different institutions and workplaces. And also thinking about Karen Armstrong, who's done a lot of work around compassion, particularly from an interfaith perspective, and going back to the gaps that we have, looking at her quote, if it's not tempered by compassion and empathy, reason can let lead men and women into a moral void. And that's where some of the really big gaps are. So what are the kind of 4 elements of compassion within which we're going to frame our presentations of what we're doing at Westminster? First of all, it's attentiveness and noticing, which isn't the same as mindfulness, which is very popular at the moment. It's about attentiveness and noticing another's need. And if there are any psychologists in the room, you'll know that there's something called selective attention. We can get so focused on things that we see in front of us, things that are driving us, benchmarks that we have to meet, metrics that we have to meet, that actually we miss everything that's going on around us. And some of you may have seen the short video clip around selective attention, where there are 6 students, 3 in black t-shirts and 3 in white t-shirts, and they're passing a basketball between them. The task is to count how many times the students with the white t-shirts pass the basketball. It's a selective, you can Google it, it's about selective attention. And as they're doing this, somebody in a gorilla suit walks through like this and goes.
Yeah.
Some of you will have seen it, walks back.
I've seen that.
You've seen that?
Yeah.
And I did a rehearsal with it, I'm not showing it here, with my sister and brother-in-law at the weekend. And I'm saying, look, just watch what it says on the screen. How many times, because you prime people, how many times do you see the people in the white shirts doing this? And they think they have to get it right. So Pamela goes, 15, and the slide says, yes, 15. And she goes, The next slide, and did you see the gorilla? No, the person in the gorilla suit. And when you rewind it, when we're focused on narrow things, we miss what's going on around us. So attentiveness and noticing, a willingness to notice the suffering of others in order to enhance their well-being. It was National Mental Health Day in the UK yesterday. I'm not going to repeat the data, but staff mental health, student mental health, suicide in young people, suicide in men. Suffering is out there, and we've got the data to show it. And this Congress is testament to that. It's a fundamental aspect of humanity in our workplaces, and it's about having courage and taking action. So my kind of final couple of points, it's about having courage to step into the heart of people who are suffering, other people's suffering, and then try and do new things that will provoke new structures and new ways of working and new responses. So it is about taking courage, and it's about people having courage to listen. So what we're just going to do is share with you a couple of things that we're doing at Westminster. From a psychology point of view, we've got some university-funded trust. Quintin Hogg was the founder of the University of Westminster. So the university is funding us to do some research, which I'm leading, with a number of colleagues, including students as co-researchers. Carl is here as part of the team. And one of our research questions is, what are BME student perceptions of the barriers and enablers of compassionate academic practice and strategy? So before I hand over to Carl, I just want to kind of really endorse his courage as a student for coming to talk to an audience like this.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, and your slides.
Okay.
That's you.
Okay. Hello. I'm a little bit nervous, so if my voice trembles, at least you know why it is. This wasn't in my notes, but I was just going to highlight that the education, I didn't really have a good school experience. So my ideas about education were quite warped, but I'll just say that and I'll carry on. But this here is basically my story in one slide. And like I said, I'm a BME student, and I'm here on behalf of BME students, but I'd like to sort of like speak up.
What does BME mean again?
Black, minority and ethnic.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. And but also I want to speak up for all other students, no matter what race, gender or social group they belong to, because inclusion is something, what I believe that if you're including people, the sum of all parts are not equal to the whole if you don't treat each part equally. So I'll go on, and I was discussing with my friend the other day, and like what I was going to say, and we came up with this quote, is that good leaders are judged by how the most vulnerable in society fare. So I have worked in various services over the last 20 years with vulnerable adults and young people. And when I returned to studies, it became so, it was magnified how the relationship between addictions, mental health, offending, all these things were related. And I noticed even more how I shared a lot of the same experiences with the people I was working with. And so I've spent the last 5 years developing my understanding of psychology so I can help the services what I've worked in develop better strategies of inclusion for the higher rate of BME offenders or educational students or whatever. Sorry, my notes is like... Yeah, so I believe when you include people, the aim should be to try and help them adapt and learn new behaviours for the different environments. Like I've been brought here today, and I'm being shown and sort of like how to change. So even though I'm not used to speaking to people, this is something I will get better at over time. And a person can identify with someone, like myself, I can identify with young people and other students, and I can also identify and speak with people from different backgrounds, totally different backgrounds, like academics. So I'm on that middle thing where I can get both sides of it. But the complexity of explaining these experiences, the paradigms which create the context, because they're all different. So a top-down approach to inclusion, sorry. See, nerves, see, I told you, nerves. But a top-down approach to inclusion dictates what best practices are used in working environments, but these aren't always inclusive. So this can stop people with lived experiences being involved in decision-making. So at various levels, confirmation bias could be a factor behind the lack of inclusion. And the higher up the ladder you go, the less inclusive the circle becomes. So a bottoms-up approach could be compassion and understanding. And this can help alleviate some of the anxieties faced by BME students going into education. And this has helped me understand that my past experiences are valid and are respected as well. Inclusion from a grassroots level should be to change the dynamics of intersectionality so we can use it to help change certain things in a continuous learning process across all levels of development with a horizontal collaborative power structure which can add intrinsic value to any practice or organisation. An example I'd give you is that if I took you to a party, one of my parties, a few of you may not be comfortable, yeah, at the beginning, but after a while, through going, you may start going by yourself. So you learn to sort of like adapt to new environments. And it's not always about being the most valuable player. Like you may have the most expensive player in a football team, but he may not always get a game. It's the player that can play in different positions who's more valued. So it's about learning about the position. So some of you may not know the lower level. It's about understanding the lower level so you can be more inclusive with your decisions. But I'm going to end on this before I hand over to Andy, is that courage is being able to speak truth to power. But it's also courageous for the power to listen. And that's it. Thank you.
Great. You can have as long as you need and I'll get a cough. Sorry? So you do. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Andy. Is this working? Hello? Yeah. Hello. I was going to break into song then. So, my talk's called Voicelessness, a Call to Action. So, I'm Andy Oresti. I'm a senior lecturer in criminology at the University of Westminster. I'm just going to quickly go over my sort of background. So, my background's psychology, and I shifted into criminology for my PhD. And I do a lot of work in prisons. So I'm going to talk about the work that we do, the sort of strategies and initiatives that we've got going on in prison, because prisoners are one of the most marginalised cohorts in the world, basically, and globally. And if you think about prisoners, can I ask you a question? if you go into any prison around the world, what type of people, when I say type of people, what sort of groups or communities are you going to sort of see in prison? That is a question, by the way. Who do you think you're going to see if you walk on a prison wing in most countries in this world? What sort of people? Where are they from? Backgrounds? Men? Criminals?
Depends.
I'm a critical criminologist. I would argue crime is a social construction, right? Okay, you will see the most marginalised and most vulnerable people in society in prison, okay? You will see we've got an overrepresentation of BME or BAME, Black and Asian ethnic minority groups in prison. You've got the poorest people in prison. Niels Christie argued that. You've got most people in prison are there because we're trying to sort out our social issues and social problems in society. Let's dump them in prison. So that's sort of setting a context for, you know, the marginalised. And this is why I do a lot of the work that I do. So my research is in desistance from crime. Basically, how do individuals that consistently engage in crime and have lived a criminogenic lifestyle make that shift or transition into the conventional world, whatever that means.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a conventional world in Amsterdam with all these coffee shops? I bet you're thinking he's been in one this morning. Can I just say, nothing was open this morning.
Yeah,
I forgot my
exactly.
toothbrush. I was trying to get a toothbrush and everyone was like, in Amsterdam at this time. So if my breath smells, that's why. Anyway, so my particular focus is on higher education and the transformational potential and impact higher education has got on the most vulnerable and people that haven't had those opportunities. And I'm really aware of time, but anyway.
Okay.
We provide opportunities in our work and in our projects in prison for the most marginalised people and cohorts and that haven't had the privilege of having the educational opportunities that you and I and my colleagues here have had, okay? So we want to provide a gateway to help them achieve that potential. What's missing? I don't know if any of you know anything about prisons and the knowledge that we have on prisons and that, but actually, all of the knowledge that we have, all of the dominant discourses about prisons and about prisoners doesn't come from prisoners. They're a silenced community, they're a silenced voice. And this is what we're trying to change, because we're trying to get prisoners to be at the centre of the penal debate. Who better to ask about prison and the conditions and what it's like? Okay, so what I'm talking about here are the wider sort of structural and social and political sort of constraints on marginalised cohorts, but particularly prisoners as well. So yeah, even advocates of prison activists that work on behalf of prisons and advocate for them, they produce knowledge and discourses and they reinforce dominant negative ideologies because they see it through their own privileged sort of unfiltered lens. They are trying to help prisoners, they've got compassion, but instead of having prisoners at the heart of the debate, they're talking on their behalf. It's like me having, say, compassion for gender discrimination in the workplace, but, you know, not having that understanding or not having women, at the centre of the debate or something. I mean, I'm sure you'd be getting security or thrown out here, right? So this is what I'm saying here, okay? So, yeah, so that's our important topic. So basically, what we do is we have a number of projects in prisons, educational prisons, and we realise the transformational impact of higher education. So we take our students into 3 or 4 different prisons in the country, basically, and they study together. If there's anyone from America here, it's the Inside Out programs, a similar sort of concept. We take our students in. A lot of our students come to university and are quite right-wing in their views. Once they go into a prison and they sort of sit there and study with prisoners, they actually have empathy for them, they have compassion for them. And the point of taking them in, well, there's a number of reasons, but one of the points is that they're the new breed of criminologists, they're the new breed of policymakers, and we're hoping that through that experience of working with prisoners, they can actually come out and have a different outlook and change much of the sort of negativity in our current criminal justice system. Because actually, our criminal justice system is racist, it's classist, it's sexist, okay, and it's divisive, and we want to change that, okay? So, I'm going to give you a bit of background context here. Excuse me, I'm not hiding, I'm just getting my water. So, in 1998, it was a sunny day. The sky was blue. I was walking through the gates of the university to do my psychology degree. And I remember that day vividly. I was looking into the sky and I was crapping myself. Does that translate globally? Do you all know what crapping myself? Yeah. Basically pooing myself. But I was so scared. I was so scared. It was a sunny day and I was looking to the sky, and I'm not overly religious or anything, but I was like, please God, just let me get through this. Let me get through this. I felt so alone. I was an older student, you know, going into a younger sort of environment. I was same as a lot of these people that are deviant and involved in crime. I was sort of, you know, not interested at school, relatively capable, but always getting in trouble and, you know, doing things what young boys do, working class background and that. But why was I so alone? Not because of my age, because a month earlier, August 1998, I'd walked out of the prison gates after serving a 3-year sentence for possession with intent to supply Class A drug. I'm no angel. I've got a lot of other non-custodial convictions. You're all looking at me. Of course he was a criminal. Shaved head, the scars, the way he is. And let me tell you something. Once you get up here,
that.
you weren't thinking
No.
that, are you sure?
Yeah.
Every time someone says, oh, what do you do? And I say, what do you think you do? Either I'm a builder or I'm a criminal. Actually, I was a roofer before I went into academia as well. So I've done it all. That's why I'm passionate about this. That's why I've got compassion. Because we can, a lot of the times we sort of, especially in criminological theory and the criminal justice system in our country and in the States particularly as well, because we're like lambs, we follow the States in all their sort of penal sort of regimes and strategies and that. I was so alone that day, and I just thought, God, wouldn't it be, I don't want people to go through that, to go to university coming from prison and have those experiences and that. And obviously, I want to change criminology. I want to change how we treat the most vulnerable and marginalised people in the world. It's not about individual social pathology. Wider social, structural and political sort of arrangements and constraints are what work in here. Yeah, I take full responsibility for what I've done in the past, obviously, but there's other wider things going on here, and I think Professor Irvin was talking about it, and Dr. Anna de Graaf, yeah, and was talking about it. And that. So this is why we do these projects. So basically, very quickly, because I'm aware of time, yeah, these are the projects that we're involved in. We've got 3 projects in prisons. One project in HMP Pentonville, where I first served the first 10 months of my sentence. I go back in that prison now as a doctor, as an academic. I don't throw the doctor thing about, but, you know, for prisoners to see me at that level, they're like, well, this guy can do it. So it's sort of giving them hope in that. We have 2 reading groups, one at the only therapeutic prison in the country, not this country, our country, HMP Grendon. Our students are going into prisons and sitting there with people that are serving 20, 30 years for obviously horrendous crimes and that, but they see them as normal people. And that is fundamental. We mentor prisoners that are in higher education, particularly criminology and psychology, etc., etc. And just very briefly, because I'm really aware of time now, we have 2 serving prisoners. One's a lifer. In other words, he's coming out of an open prison and coming to our university, and he's studying his degree, and the other one's doing 13 years for armed robbery, and he's been through the system as well. They come to our university. Our university funds our projects, they support our projects, and, you know, they're really up for getting sort of these marginalised and oppressed cohorts and people into university, because if you're going to change society, that is the way to do it, in my view, through education. And I'm really aware of time, so sorry,
You've still
but
got a little bit of time.
Oh, have I?
It's up to
I'll
you.
give you a little song as well then. So I want to thank the university for that. And there's one more person I really want to thank. And who says crime doesn't pay, right? Here I am here. I got invited to St. Paul's Cathedral, which I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, the massive cathedral in central London, in the city of London, and by Pentonville, my old prison, that I go into now, but I serve time in. It was their 175th anniversary. Like, I want to go and celebrate prisons. Prisons are the worst place ever, let me tell you. But they invited me because arguably they see me as a success story. I studied there. the most important and influential person for me in that prison was the prison educator, Jane Broadfoot, who lives in my heart because she supported me, she was there for me, she just facilitated my studying while I was in prison. And that woman is why, arguably, I'm here today. So if you want to see compassion, and whatever compassion means, that was compassion. And I will stop. Thank you very much.
Fantastic.
Oh, can I just say one thing? Some of my colleagues didn't know about my past, so if they're not talking to me at breakfast tomorrow morning, I know why.
Thanks, Andy. Okay, it's my job just to do some concluding remarks. And I guess I've got a number of kind of take-home messages. The first one is a bit of what I call a health warning. We need to avoid at all costs, particularly in the world that we're living in at the moment where everything is counted within an inch or a centimetre of its life. We must avoid the commodification of compassion. It must not become seen as the latest buzzword, the latest thing, the latest panacea. So that's a bit of a health warning. And I've got kind of three take-home messages that all begin with A, which is just reinforcing the main points. It's about attentiveness and noticing, and actually taking the time to stop and think. And for those of us that work in universities, but also in a very fast-paced, uncertain and volatile world, so I think we're beginning to lose the capacity to stop and think because we're just so busy all of the time. So attentiveness and noticing is about taking the time to stop and think. But it's also thinking about the notion of action and taking action rather than dusty action plans with ongoing in the nice column. And it's also about being authentic, about being real. And I think it's fantastic that Carl and Andy were so authentic and so real. So I just want to leave you with a slide, which I'm not going to talk through, I'll just leave it with you. But it's one that when Debbie Husbands and I have done work around this and presentations around compassion and intersectionality, which is a lesson from history, which I think says everything about the importance of action. So I'm just going to leave us with this. Thank you.
Thank you. So please stay up if you'd like. It's up to you.